If you don't play old school adventure games, you're probably unaware of the term adventure game logic. You see, adventure games are designed around the player searching the area for useful items and then solving puzzles in another area using the items you collected. Unfortunately, this system gets abused very easily, and so the puzzles and solutions start existing for their own sake and don't really follow any other logic apart from this is the only way to solve the puzzle. And I mention this because, unfortunately, Evil Under the Sun has this in spades. I know this is more of a roleplay session between Poirot and Hastings, but why would Poirot, the world-famous detective with a strong sense of justice, condone stealing various objects from the hotel before the murder case has even started? There's even one scene where he breaks into someone's hotel room, cuts off the lever from their suitcase so that he can repair someone else's goggles and ask them to grab a life ring to satisfy his own curiosity.
Luggage strap? Why, so it is. In fact, if I didn't know better...
Oh man, they're on to me.
Thank you for the assistance, Monsieur Redfern. Good day, gentlemen.
Keep walking, Poirot. Do not make eye contact. They will forget about it. It also doesn't help that there are times when the game's structure ends up working against the story. In Chapter 2, for example, despite the fact that I had spoken to everyone on the island and solved all the problems given to me, the game refused to continue to the next chapter. After searching every single nook and cranny of the island, wondering what it was I missed, I gave up and consulted an online guide, and as it turned out, I had missed something vital! I hadn't picked up a leaflet from the local post office. Ah, but that leaflet must have been a vital clue, right? Actually, no. Poirot just hands it to Reverend Lane in order to recommend a good walk, and nothing ever comes of it. But at least we know where it came from! It's difficult to describe how silly this gets, so I'm just going to leave you with this puzzle as an example. Poirot learns that someone threw a ball into the sea and remembers that the beach attendant, George, is training to be a Navy frogman, so he asks him to retrieve it for him. However, news of the murder has shaken George to his very core, and he'll need a stiff drink to regain his nerves. This makes me wonder how useful he'll be as a frogman in wartime, but whatever. When you visit the bar, you find out that, by pure coincidence, they've run out of the ingredients for George's favourite drink. Rather than simply buying another drink, Poirot decides to search for the ingredients himself. He starts by using cough syrup as a substitute for grenadine, but since the barman rightfully won't serve cough syrup to his customers, you have to fish a grenadine bottle out of the bin and put cough syrup into that. Then you need to obtain some dark rum, a barrel of which can be found in a pub that has been closed for over a century and is now basically a museum. After pouring the rum into a glass, which incidentally you swiped from a drinks trolley in the hotel, you hand the ingredients over to the barman, obtain the cocktail and give it to George, and thankfully this mixture of cough syrup and ancient rum is just what George needed to get back into action. And they wonder why no one takes adventure games seriously anymore. Since this is an adaptation, we get to do something new on Video Game Troubadour, comparing the game to the source material. What changes did Evil Under the Sun have to make in order to become a game, and do they add something to the story or take something away? I'll mostly be ignoring the small details like Billy Parsons' original job or the name of the island itself, and instead focus on the main changes to the characters and story progression. First off, the Billy Parsons case was mentioned in the book, but Poirot simply examined the case file before deciding it was unrelated to this one. The game expands on it by allowing Poirot to not only solve the case, but also using it as a backstory for both Emily Brewster and Linda Marshall. Emily Brewster is now a teacher who taught Minnie Parsons, and asks Poirot to solve it so that she can finally lay those demons to rest. And doing so means that she will help Poirot later on by giving him free boat rides to the cove where Arlena was murdered. Linda, on the other hand, was a friend of Millie Parsons, and she suspected another teacher, Gideon Fell, who was also a practitioner of voodoo, of being the murderer. So she and her friends got together and performed a voodoo ritual to punish him. When he eventually left due to ill health and incompetence, Linda believed it was because of the voodoo. So when Arlena started flirting with Patrick, Linda decided to try it again in order to scare Arlena into changing her ways. In the book, however, Linda had no experience with voodoo or anything related to the occult. She just happened to come across a book about witchcraft in a local post office and decided to try it on the spur of the moment because she hated Arlena that much. Whether or not that's a better explanation is up to you, but I still feel it's a really good move that they took an unexplored element and used it to expand characters like this. That said, one change that makes Poirot look like a bit of a git is that whilst in the book Linda tried to kill herself with sleeping drugs at the suggestion of the real murderer, in the game Linda does it in a moment of panic after she realises that Poirot has been going through her things and may be onto her. And it's not just Poirot who suffers from the adaptation. Mrs. Castle, for example, goes from just being a background character with a dodgy accent to becoming a German spy that tries to hide a U-boat that's floating around the island. The Reverend Stephen Lane still had a fit against women in the book, but it's revealed that he was going through therapy after he started to lose his mental health and feared the devil disguised as a woman. Which is still bad, but at least he wasn't an open misogynist who perverted the course of justice because he felt the victims had it coming. There's also a character I didn't mention in the suspect section because her role is severely downgraded from the book. The fashion designer Rose Mandani. In the book, she's kind of like Anna Malkovich from Metroid Other Rim. A lot is said about her, but she does very little to back it up. She's meant to be a glamorous and intelligent woman who built her fashion empire from the ground up, and even manages to impress Poirot with her sharp wits. However, when you get right down to it, she completely misjudges Arlena Marshall, tells Linda to stay silent when she tries to confide in her, and lies to create an alibi for Captain Marshall, which he didn't need anyway since his alibi was already backed up by others. Her real role is being a childhood friend of Captain Marshall, which allows her to ask personal questions like, why haven't you dumped the woman who flirts with every guy she sees despite being married? This doesn't really work for a video game as you're always viewing things from Poirot's perspective, meaning he's the one who has to ask the questions, and there's only so many times Poirot could just happen to be within earshot during a personal conversation, which is why her role has been diminished here. She's also in the book to give Marshall a happy ending, since, you know, his wife's now dead. But that gets dropped as well, since the ending is completely different from the book, but I'll get to that in the next section. So overall, I think the adaptation was faithful to the story, even if some of the characters ended up with smaller roles or just ended up looking worse because of it. But I've kept you waiting long enough. It's time to finally reveal the truth about this mystery.
Warning, I already know I've warned of spoilers in the opening, but seriously, the next section will be revealing who actually committed the murder. If you want to figure out the mystery yourself, stop watching now and come back later. You have been warned. Enjoy the show.
Ah, the big reveal. This is the best part of any Poirot story. The great moment when all the unanswered questions are solved. The way Poirot brings up little details that have absolutely nothing to do with the case in hand, just to freak out several people he knows aren't actually the killer. The way Poirot constantly forgets to bring weapons or restraints with him, despite the fact that he knows full well that he's confronting cold-hearted murderers. The game also heightens the sense of excitement before the reveal with this well-written monologue from Poirot.
Hastings, the time it has arrived. The crowning glory of any case. That sublime moment when the spotlight shines down. A hush descends upon the audience, and all eyes turn to Poirot. Tonight, however, this stage, it shall be yours. Some will listen in relief, others in anger at what must be revealed. And some will listen in fear as the net of truth slowly, inexorably tightens about them.
Admittedly, you don't get to point the finger yourself, you just get to answer a series of multiple choice questions. But still, it's cool to have some interaction for a scene like this, and it would be hard to choose the real murderer given the nature of Agatha Christie's stories. You see, Agatha Christie likes to do two things with her reveals. The first is that she will keep a piece of information hidden from the reader until the last minute, like, aha! You thought that the victim was Adam Goodinson, but in fact it was janitor number 3, who had no choice but to steal his identity because insert reason here. The second thing she likes to do is establish one critical fact that seems to be the center of this case and turn it on its head at the last second. Like, aha! You thought that Mary was holding a knife, but in fact she was holding a herring! This is a hit or miss tactic. Sometimes it can make the story really clever and interesting, and other times it can just seem downright ridiculous. This story uses both tactics, as Poirot reveals that Arlena had gone to meet some people who were blackmailing her. And on a side note, I will admit I liked how Poirot solved the case by looking at Arlena's character in a different light, rather than assuming she was a cruel temptress like everyone else did.
Arlena Marshall was a woman who needed to be admired, adored. It is true, but what was the result? She was fair game for a certain type of man who takes advantage of such women.
But anyway, it's revealed that Christie Redburn tampered with Liddy's watch so that she could have an alibi. In other words, she was on the beach much earlier than everyone thought. Once she arrived, she grabbed the unconscious Arlena, who had drunk and drugged coffee, and hid her inside a cave, before pretending to be the dead body of Arlena Marshall. In other words, she was the dead body that Patrick Redfern and Emily Brewster discovered. After Patrick told Emily Brewster to get help, Christie escaped and Patrick went back to the cave, strangled the still unconscious Arlena, and placed her body where Christine was, thus killing Arlena whilst giving himself an alibi in the process. Why would they do this, and how the hell did Poirot figure it out? Poirot discovered that there was a similar case where a woman named Alice Corrigan had been strangled, but whilst her husband was the main suspect, he had an alibi since he was on the train and the hiker discovered the body whilst he was in transit. But it turns out that the husband and the hiker are in fact Christine and Patrick Redfern. And there you have it. The Redferns are serial killers who are masters at faking alibis, and the body of Arlena Marshall was in fact someone else all this time. It's too bad that this plan could have gone wrong in so many ways it's not even funny. Even if I was nice and avoided nitpicking over stuff like the sand giving away their movements, a large part of this plan relies on Emily Brewster not looking too closely at the body in front of her. Arlena, no! So cruelly taken before your time! Are you sure that's Arlena? Of course it is! Can't you tell by the exquisite beauty that is now lying as a cold, lifeless... It's just her hands, feet, face, and the rest of her body doesn't really look quite right. No, that's just a side effect of the shock from when they were strangled. The body contorted into weird shapes and... Oh, Arlena, so cruelly She also seems to have gained a few pounds. How dare you! What was that? That was Arlena's spirit of the wind cursing you for being so disrespectful before being eternally silent. She's also very clearly breathing. Oh yeah, so she is! A miracle! It's a miracle, but she's still very, very weak. Why don't you go on ahead and get some help and I'll stay and tend to her? Are you sure? I mean, we could just put her back in the boat and... Look! Will you just leave? It's at this point that the ending starts to deviate drastically from the book. See, in the original, Poirot's clincher was getting Patrick Redburn to lose his temper so that he would give himself away. But in the game, he pulls out a gun and... Oh my word. I've only just realised. Patrick Redburn was the murderer!
You damned, interfering, lousy little worm. One step and I'll kill you. I may do it anyway.
Patrick thinks he has an escape plan since he has a local mechanic, Jenks, waiting for him via boat, and all he has to do is give the signal. However, Poirot had messed with the code book so that Patrick would give the signal for fire on this position. And despite Poirot's best efforts to warn him, Patrick gives the signal and...
Fire!
Hell.
Are you having me on? Ah, but it all happened, Hastings, as incredible as it may seem. And so the U-boat sinks beneath the water. A German U-boat opens fire on a British hotel and the press don't report it? Ah, but such is the tragedy of war, Hastings. This whole story's a load of codswallop, isn't it? How absurd. Hercule Poirot does not lie. He merely exaggerates certain details and makes additions to an already terrific story. That's exactly the same thing. Ah, but I do it with style, monsieur. I also have to bring up the final scene of the game, which ends the story on a surprisingly somber note.
Oh, I feel like the dinosaur, Hastings. Gone is my world, where good always triumphs over evil. Where the clues, they all add up to the satisfactory solution. Where the murderer never escapes. This will be war as we have never seen it. Whatever the outcome, mon ami, the cost, it will be high. And I fear our world, it will never be the same.
And we've discussed all the important elements of this story. All that remains is my final thoughts. In all honesty, I really enjoyed this story. It's a good adaptation that makes great use of its source material and has some really clever ideas. I'm not sure how much pleasure you'd get out of it if you weren't an Agatha Christie fan already, since the ending is silly, the story suffers from pacing issues, there are one too many side plots and some really odd leaps of logic, but I'd still say there's plenty to enjoy in this adventure. So consider this a cautious recommendation from me. I've been the Jonin Monkey, and until next time, cheerio.